Okay, hello everyone today. Thanks for taking a look at this Cloudify demo. Today we're going to take a look at the Cloudify multi-cloud Kubernetes demo, which we're taking a look at here. What you're seeing is the Cloudify Manager web UI, and we've got a blueprint, a Tosca YAML blueprint for Cloudify loaded up, and we'll take a look at it now. What you're seeing here is a topology which makes use of AWS VPC, CentOS VM, as well as a subnet, and all the networking components you expect to go along with that, routes, security groups, CentOS ports. I'll go through in detail the blueprint that makes up this topology, kind of walk you through the code that powers this and see how it's laid out. For now, let's just kind of focus on the UI and how it's laid out and see the deployment and workflow installation happen in real time. And then we'll circle back and take a look at the details. On the right side, you see actually the GCP and GKE, the Google Kubernetes engine, visualized. We have a Kubernetes master, a small Hello World app service, does what you might expect, says Hello World from a Flask app type situation, and a few other components. So you can see in one section here, we're crossing clouds, we're writing and calling REST API for GCP, GKE, and AWS, all within one blueprint. We also make use of the Google Container Registry in this blueprint, in this Cloudify demo. It houses just that basic Hello World Docker container image, and I'll go through that as well. So we'll launch this in just a second, and before I do, I kind of want to give you a view of the infrastructure down below that we're actually orchestrating across. So let's do that now, or pop over from the Cloudify UI to the Google Compute Engine and show you what's running there currently and what we're going to launch in just a few minutes. So here you see that I have two VMs running for this demo. This is a CLI box. It's Cloudify version 4.2 that I use to run my commands. And then the Cloudify Manager VM, which is, if you see this address right here, this 155.68, that's actually where the Cloudify Manager is running right now on GCP, on the GCE, the compute engine portion of it. And then also we have the Google Container Engine, the Google Kubernetes engine that was just recently renamed. Here we have 3 nodes, cluster that's been previously spun up as well. And we'll be launching a service into this as well in just a few minutes. So that takes care of the compute engine. We do have a couple of other older versions just shut down. We're not going to be running them right now. Let's pop over to the Kubernetes engine and show you that we have a basic Hello World cluster. That's what I called it. It's running in US West 1A zone. It's a small cluster of just 3 nodes, as well as with 3 vCPUs allotted with just a little bit of RAM, 11, 12 gigs there, and that's the version of Kubernetes that's running. You don't have any workloads or load balancing. We're just going to make basic usage when we launch the Hello World app container image in just a minute. So that's what's running on GKE. We are actually housing the Hello World app in GCR here. We built it with Docker locally, and then also tested it with Google Container Builder, GCB, and then pushed it in here into GCR. So these are usually what you'll have available to you, some listing of your applications or your container images that you can launch into a service. Okay, so we have basic Hello World app listed there. Nothing too special. If you're curious, these images are based on the container optimized image from Google, not CentOS, not Ubuntu. That is what I used out of the box. It's just the default COS base image, and then you can put your apps. This happens to be a Flask, just Hello World app on top there. So that's what I chose. But it should be very compatible if you want to use CentOS or Ubuntu-based image, in addition to working with COS from Google, from the service itself. So that's GCR bits. And then you'll also see a blank slate here pretty much of AWS. So we have no VMs running, just some older Cloudify version 4.1.1 and so forth that I have stopped that we're not going to be using in this demo. So those are the different bits that we'll use infrastructure-wise that I've shown. And you'll see when I launch the workflow and the blueprint in just a second, things will start showing up here and we'll be orchestrating as normal. Okay, so let's go ahead and hop over here. And we have our local blueprint listed. I called it Cloudify Multi-Cloud Kubernetes Demo. And I believe we talked about what the topology looks like. So let's go ahead and create a deployment out of the local blueprint and move forward here. I'll just give it its basic name based on the blueprint here. And you'll also see, and I'll go into detail in just a minute after this is all completed, what the blueprint looks like in code. But we have default values here. CentOS agent user. CentOS is the VM that's going to be launched. CentOS 7 actually on AWS. That's a call out to the AMI ID and so forth. These are all inputs that you might want to change over time, but that we've already supplied in the blueprint. These are a little bit newer things that are coming for and required for Kubernetes. The cluster cert is a requirement, as well as a client cert and a client key. And I'll show you what those look like in the YAML code in just a minute. But these are already all set for us in the blueprint, so we don't need to change anything. So let's go ahead and, I've already done that previously, so we'll skip the plugin validation and we'll go ahead and deploy. So you'll see when you hit a deployment, it's going to move from local blueprints. It'll actually create something here, and you'll see it's creating its node instances. It's in progress as well. If you click on this section, you go into the deployment. We are no longer in the local blueprint. We're in the topology section of the deployment, and you can get some extra options here. You see this Tosca nodes, the Cloudify nodes that are being created here. We will have some deployment outputs when this is all done. That was represented there. We've got some executions. And you see this here. We've got actually it happened pretty quickly before we could kind of even get here. You see that everything that was accomplished and created here, we did Kubernetes plugins, we did some agent install verifications and so forth, and then we finished up the deployment with a workflow execution. So we're ready. We're ready with the deployment, and we're ready to move on to the next section, which is the workflow install. And I'll do that now, and this should look familiar because we just discussed it. Let me zoom in a little bit. There you go. And we're going to go ahead and execute the basic install flow. In case there's retries, I'll go ahead and click on that button, which sometimes happens when we're going across clouds, waiting for things to be available to us. And we'll click on execution. So you'll see that the ellipses turn black here, which represents that we're going to start doing work across clouds. You can see that the Kubernetes master and API calls are being set up. Let's not take too much time at the topology. Let's go down into the log and actually see it happen. See, I'm going to maximize this widget here, and we'll see it's actually going through Elastic EIP stuff for AWS, as well as calling out to GCP. A lot of work's being done here. Oh, we've got something that's going to have to be rescheduled, which is just fine. It's just waiting for that instance to come up in AWS, which is a common occurrence. You got to wait a little while for something to get into the desired state, and then we'll go from pending to launched in a second here. And we'll just kind of watch and scroll through these things as they come in. And if you wanted to kind of simultaneously take a look, you could minimize the widget, come up to the topology. Oh, you got some green checks that are continuing to come in and move across the full installation and pop back down to the deployment logs. We've got some, all right, so the CentOS is starting to come up. We've got some SSH calls coming in as well. So we'll let that bake for a few minutes while we wait here. Let's go check in on the infrastructures while that's happening. You can see here nothing will have changed much from this view. You've got the two VMs plus the GKE cluster. Let's take a look at the Kubernetes engine and see if we've got any workloads being launched. Yeah, we've got a Hello app here, which is great. Some replication sets, which is always nice. I think the discovery and load balancing might be still coming up. Okay, we've got some here, some options. Container registry, we won't see any changes in because all we're doing is pulling an image from the GCR It's just basically there waiting for us to be a housing for our images. Let's take a look at the EC2 Manager console. If we refresh that, you should see the CentOS image being there. Yep, there it is. It's still in initialization, but it was launched successfully, given a public IP address and all of the security group parts. So that's starting to look good. Let's pop back over here. Looks like it was waiting previously for just something, and it did all of its work. Yeah, so we've got through all the configuration of the nodes, the Tosca nodes, and the install workflow actually did succeed successfully. So let's minimize that and take a look at the topologies to make sure everything looks good. Yeah, I've got all the green checks, and we've completed the full workflow install. And then we did have some outputs here that just verify that we launched everything, and some public and private IP stuff that I put in there. So that's how it works. You can see here that in the Kubernetes engine, you can click on this area and then actually launch the Hello World app, which is there. So we've done a workload. We've taken an image from container registry, launched things in Kubernetes engine while simultaneously doing work in an AWS as well. So really great use case here, a lot of power moving forward with the Kubernetes APIs and all the great load balancing replicas and great new features of container orchestration that's happening in that ecosystem. Let's pop over for a second to the code level of this blueprint and kind of walk through. If you can't see it, I'll increase the font a little bit. So here, if we walk through this blueprint, you'll see that we've got our normal call out to our Cloudify domain specific language. It's our core orchestration engine. We've also got the imports of the exact Cloudify Tosca types, as well as our plugins that we're using for this use case, including Kubernetes plugin, Google Cloud Platform, AWS, and Fabric is our SSH framework. So those are the ones that are being used in this particular instance, although you could mix and match and add others as well if you wanted other clouds or other use cases. As you move through here, you'll see us call out in a way that we can access the APIs off of each cloud, which is necessary. So we need to actually authenticate with an AWS access key, secret key, and so forth. We also support OAuth 2 tokens, so you could do it that way. There's some flexibility and so forth. We're actually calling the real values from a secret store that we maintain in the manager, which I'll pop over to here, so that you do not have to have full keys being listed in the clear text of the blueprint. So we house them here in the secret store. So that's what you're seeing in these parts. These are inputs, like I said previously, where we have the CentOS computer name be called out, AMI IDs that we're going to use, a CentOS small with a certain amount of RAM in a specific region, in this case US West. I think Oregon is the one I used here. And then we also have combinations and crossing cloud here with the Kubernetes newer parts, things such as the Kubernetes master IP is called out, the master port, port 443 in this case. And like I said earlier, the certificate for the cluster is needed to make API calls into the Kubernetes cluster, the client certificate and the client key, which are grabbed from the kube config. So you would get those values by launching the GKE cluster, and then getting credentials from there. And writing a .cube and then .config file, and then plugging them into here. And those are items that you can run from the gcloud command line or from the GKE cluster. So that's something that's managed by Google. It's a basic cert and key that you'll plug into your cluster here, your Cloudify blueprint. So as we move through here, you'll see the master config for Kubernetes. Gives it a context. If you're familiar with how to set up kubeconfig and kubecontrol, this should all be familiar. This is my user from within GCP. We have some key information that you can put in there or in the secret store as well. And then we move into the full listing of all the Cloudify node templates. I'm not going to go through them one by one. We don't have enough time right this second, but we have this available that you can review, or you can ask us for support, and we'll walk you through it. But these are are all things you expect. Key pairs, elastic IPs, security groups, and then node instances for the VM. Some custom tasks that we needed to run for this use case, relationships which are important in the Tosca world, and Cloudify, connecting things and the way our framework works. VPC callouts, gateways, security groups for the VM, route tables, all parts that are necessary to launch that VM in AWS. And here is the part that's Kubernetes specific. You have our node template for Kubernetes master, calling into that master config. As well, this is all pretty easy to do. We've already got many examples of how to lay this out. And then here's where the Hello World container is actually called, and then the deployment of that image and container into the Kubernetes cluster. So this is, if you're familiar with kubectl, you have concepts of deployments, replica sets, load balancers, and so forth, and we are able to model them here in our node templates in Tosca and Cloudify. So all able to model and declare it in a really nice, easy to manage fashion. So there's the deployment part, and then there's the service, which is often done for the load balancer, needs to go along with the deployment so that you can have replica sets and use your services. And the last part is just the outputs that I said. I put in some custom outputs to get public IP addresses and so forth. So that's it. This is the full multi-cloud crossing Kubernetes on GKE and on the Google Cloud Platform, as well as AWS in a single environment that's being launched here. I will just start the uninstall process, and I think I'll wrap up and take it from there. So here we have this. Let's go ahead and tear this thing down. I'll do an uninstall, and in case there's any issues, I'll just let it continue. All right, thank you for stopping by. And if you have any questions, just reach out to us and we'll be happy to answer them. All right, take care. Bye-bye now.